Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digi Finance video. So today I'm going to be looking at UTI and covering their bi-monthly sales rankings, and this is for the time period of June 1st through June 15th. And basically, for those who don't know, this is them stating what are the best-selling cards in each rarity minus secret rare for that given time period, and they give a little brief description on why. So looking at their sales rankings, it looks like the best-selling SR during this time period is going to be Eosmond. So Eosmond is an extremely powerful Digimon, and it looks like his deck is extremely popular and extremely powerful. So not only does he have a lot of attention just because of sheer popularity, but he also has a lot of attention due to his current role in the meta for Japan, and he definitely looks like he is a dominating force in Japan because he is the sole reason why Red is doing as well as it is. So what's making the card super powerful is just everything revolving around the card. So he has a nice on-attack ability that lets you play your sister mons for free, and then you get value off of the sister mons depending on which one you play, and both of them are very good utility type cards, on top of which he also DP boosts himself and gives him penetrate, so that way he's going to ensure that he's dealing damage and hitting for high numbers. Pair that up with Red's Security Tac Plus sub-theme, and he could hit for lots of damage on top of that, and hit for even higher numbers if he wanted to. So he's just looking to be an absolutely fantastic card for Red as a whole, and as such, that's probably why he's doing as well as he is. So if we take a look at Japan's data, we could see during this time period, Red just steadily increased in terms of popularity and overall presence in the meta, because it also was winning quite a lot. And we have this nice little graph here that kind of also represents this type of data, and definitely is showing that there is a huge uptick in Red's overall power and popularity. And then if we hop over to the section where we get to look at all of the Red cards and the card prevalence, we could see that every single one of the Red decks that we're topping during this time period are all Eosmond decks. So this definitely shows that Eosmond has a huge representation in the overall meta in BT06 in Japan. Next, we have the best-selling rare during this time period, which is actually kind of a surprise to me, considering it is Izzy and Joe. So Izzy and Joe is the new black duo tamer that is coming out of BT06, and while I do think this card is a really decent card, it's just black hasn't had a huge overall representation in the meta like ever. It had a small uptick and it sees some results here and there, but nothing too dominating or noteworthy, so it's definitely interesting that Izzy and Joe is the best-selling rare during this time period, but it only makes sense considering Alphamon definitely is a really powerful and really popular deck, and people definitely wanted to try it out, and it does have some success, and it is definitely looking to be pretty strong, and Izzy and Joe is just a good card for that because of what this card is doing. So this card being a duo tamer definitely is good just because it allows black to gain some additional memory for very little effort, considering its condition in order to gain the 2 memory is only if your opponent has more Digimon than you. So again, that's not necessarily the hardest thing in the world, but it also has a nice ability that triggers on the opponent's turn, where when your black Digimon is deleted, you could rest this card to draw 1 card, which is definitely really huge for black, considering black doesn't have a lot of ways of drawing cards. So the fact that this could be gaining you memory and drawing you cards makes this really, really good for a lot of black decks, and as a result, just a really powerful tamer overall. And like I said, even though black doesn't necessarily have the biggest overall representation in the meta, and in fact it's actually on the decline, it still does have lots of experimental play, and it's still a really fun casual deck. So what this also isn't taking into account is casual decks as well and casual players. So that's just one huge big aspect of any trading card game, is looking past the competitive scene, and black is still a really popular color in the more casual sense, just because it's a lot more accessible of a color than some of the others, especially in Japan with their prices being a lot lower and cards being a lot more readily available and accessible than in other places of the world. But I digress, and even though, like I said, black isn't having a huge representation, it still does see some play, most of the time it's actually going to be as a part of the hybrids. So if we look at the hybrids, we could see that there is a large portion of the hybrids that are actually incorporating black in some way, shape, or form. Granted, there's other color combinations that are also really powerful, but the fact that black is one of the better splash colors as of right now, just because of everything that it has and all of the new tools that it's getting, it definitely means that even though there's not a whole bunch of mono black decks being represented, black is still being played in some capacity. Next, onto the best-selling uncommon during this time period, we have Sabre Hackmon. So Sabre Hackmon is a card that goes into the Eosmond deck, so as more and more people are looking to pick up the Eosmond deck, it only makes sense that people are going to be looking to pick up his pieces, and Sabre Hackmon is definitely a really powerful piece for that deck because of what he's doing for the deck. And what he's doing is, when you Digivolve up into him, he's allowing you to play one of your Sistermons for free, and again, Sistermon has Hackmon and Royal Knight interactions. So the fact that he's allowing you to play your Sistermons also is really, really powerful, and on top of which, he also has a really nice inheritable skill where he allows your Eosmond to basically multi-attack. So pair multi-attacking with piercing and being able to play multiple Sistermons and all of the Sistermon abilities and just everything else that Red is doing. It's just looking to be a very powerful deck, and Sabre Hackmon is definitely looking to be a really powerful piece for that deck. So hopping in and looking at the data, we could see that decks that are playing Eosmond are playing for Eosmond, and decks that are also playing Eosmond are also playing for Sabre Hackmon. So it definitely shows that it is a very powerful piece for that deck, and as such is why it is the best-selling uncommon during this time period. And then lastly, on to the best-selling common during this time period, we have Eosmond. So this Eosmond is probably only the best-selling common during this time period, just because it has this unique ability where you could basically run up to 50 of it in your deck if you really wanted to. Because it has this ability, you're going to want to run more of this card than any other card in your deck, just because you're allowed to, and it's actually really good for the Eosmond deck, even though the Eosmond deck hasn't necessarily seen a huge representation in the overall meta in Japan. It's still a deck that just sometimes does well, and if you are considering on building that deck, you are going to probably need around 8 to 12 of this copy of Eosmond. So if just a couple of people are building that deck, that definitely is going to skew the overall sales records to put Eosmond in favor over any other common, just because you're going to need more of it for the deck than any normal card that'll go into your deck. And then just as a friendly reminder when looking at this data, that Japan mostly hasn't had any super large events, and for the most part all of their events have been basically locals. And on top of that, they also didn't incorporate in this graph a line for hybrids, and they also didn't incorporate a line for white, just because those are two deck types that are slowly forming and being more popularized. So that's just something to keep in mind when looking at this type of data. And then hopping over to the English side of the Digimon card game and taking a look at the English secondary market and the English meta, we definitely can see that the meta is slowly shaping around 3 decks that are really prominent and really powerful, and those 3 decks are going to be Yellow War Greymon, Purple Metal Garurumon, and Green Nidhoggmon. So those are the 3 more powerful decks to come out of BT04, but that doesn't mean a whole bunch of other decks aren't performing. Red Omnimon is still really good and got a whole bunch of new powerful tools in this set. Same thing with Imperial Dramon, where just the introduction of Lobomon into the set definitely adds a lot of extra power to that deck. And same thing with Rookie Rush, there's still just a whole bunch of other very powerful decks that could be played. It's just right now the overall representation of the meta is going to be more focused on Yellow War Greymon, Purple Metal Garurumon, and Green Nidhoggmon. But in terms of what the actual secondary market is doing, the one really interesting thing to note is the fact that the Great Legends booster box selling price is going down. I remember on pre-sale it was selling for $150, and then on release it was selling for like $120, and now it's down to just below $110. So the booster box prices is falling, and this is primarily due to the overall value in the set. So as we can see, just scrolling down, some cards still have a decent amount of value, but for the most part, the set isn't necessarily doing the hottest. Like outside of this first page, we could see that a lot of the SRs are in that sub $10 mark, and there's not a whole lot of high value rares. And the box toppers aren't holding well either. So between all of those factors, it definitely is hurting the overall EV or estimated value of a booster box, and as the EV lowers, it definitely makes it less and less worth it to buy the booster boxes at a higher price. So as a result, the price of the booster box is going to have to come down as well. And then the overall secondary market for a lot of the other sets in terms of their singles are definitely on the decline just because we're slowly getting more and more product. So as we get more and more product, more gets introduced into the secondary market, and it definitely looks like there's more than enough to go around. So cards are stabilizing and finding their proper price point across all the sets. But I definitely think as more comes out, so when we do get more 1.0 and 1.5, the prices are going to continue to fall a little bit, but the fact that these cards are still meta relevant definitely helps them hold a decent price tag, especially certain cards like Vmon and Lady Devimon, where they just have some really good longevity because of how good they are and how many decks that they can go into. So it's not like there's no value in the other sets, even though we do see the value decreasing. It's just reflecting how much product there is and the overall demand for the cards, just because, again, the meta is changing, more focused around BT04 and what it's doing, rather than focusing on the previous sets. So as we see the meta continue to change and develop, we'll continue to see certain cards that go up and down. So one of those cards, as an example, is going to be Millenniumon, where we're seeing a huge uptick in purple and the demand to play purple. And as Millenniumon is currently the only level 7 purple has access to, it makes more sense that it has more attention on it. So a lot of people are picking it up rather than picking up Omnimon. So probably what a lot of people are thinking is, let me just try to sell my Omnimon to pick up some other cards, just because Omnimon isn't the most meta-relevant card anymore, and they're probably just going to be picking up other cards instead. So Millenniumon is definitely looking to be one of those, and as we know, the meta is still more focused around yellow and yellow War Greymon, so a lot of the yellow cards are still on the hotter side, so the fact that TK is still a rare holding a very high price tag definitely means that there is some longevity in the set, and the set hasn't lost a lot of value, and there's still just a whole bunch of good cards in these sets to go back to. And then taking a quick look at the starter decks, all of them are still relatively decent products and definitely should be picked up if you're going to be playing any of those particular colors. Pick up the one that fits best with your color or playstyle, just because, again, they still have some really decent cards within them, and they are a little bit more accessible now than they were in the past in terms of their overall price point. You could still, with a little bit of digging and searching, can find them for relatively decent price points. I think like the average starter deck is going for around $15 now, which is only $5 above MSRP, but if you could find them at like Target, Walmart, or your local game store does sell them at MSRP, then I definitely would pick up these starter decks. Any of the starter decks are really good. It all just depends on what cards you're looking for within the starter deck and what color you want to play as a whole. But the starter decks are definitely still really good products, and you should definitely still think about picking them up if you can. And then promos are always going to be in a really interesting spot just because Bandai is notoriously bad at handling their promos, and as a result, the more meta-relevant exclusive a promo gets, the higher the price tag is going to be. For the most part, it seems like they're doing a pretty decent job, at least over in Japan, where it's just a whole bunch of reprints, and I definitely really like the alt art reprint take, instead of just locking exclusive cards behind exclusive means of getting them, so that way it just creates a additional layer of an entry to barrier in order to play particular decks. So the Great Legend power-up packs definitely are the biggest offender to this, just because those cards are going to be harder to get than anything else in the set, and depending on what you want to play, they are going to be some of the most expensive cards and probably where the majority of the money within the set went to. Just because if you want to play, let's just say, a green deck, there's a very high chance that you're going to want to play this Palmon just because it's generically good for anything that does Digiburst, which there's a lot of decks in green that interact with Digiburst. So this Palmon can go into a whole bunch of decks and is a really important card in the Grand Kawagamon deck, where the whole idea is just that you use Grand Kawagamon to give himself Security Attack Plus multiple times, then Palmon underneath will give him jamming, so that way you could swing for a lot of the opponent's security with relatively low risk. So that's just one example. You have the Lobomon and Agumon promos, which definitely make the ancient decks a lot more playable, and you have the Devimon promo, which definitely makes the Dan Devimon deck even a possibility. Otherwise, without this Devimon, there's no realistic way that you're actually going to want to play that Dan Devimon, unless you're just throwing him in as a Megazoo card. So, these promos that definitely make a lot of decks playable, and as such are definitely highly sought after cards, and with how exclusive they are to get, because you have to buy a booster box in order to get them, and in a case setting is how you're going to get a full playset. These cards are going to be a lot harder to get than anything else, and as such will hold a lot higher price tag on average than anything in the set. So the power-up cards are probably also a contributing factor to how the set's EV got as low as it does, just because in order to play certain decks you need these cards, and you need these cards more than the key card that is relatively easy to get in the set. So that's kind of the unfortunate side effect, but regardless, it's still just what happens. And then on top of that, we have all of the other promos, which seem to be settling and finding their price point. Obviously, the more hot and sought after ones are going to be more in demand, or the more exclusive ones are going to be more in demand and have a higher price point. But for the most part, it looks like a lot of these promos are finding a normal, stable price point, given what they are and how you come by them. But overall, I do think that the secondary market is in a better position than it was in the past, just because cards are slowly becoming more accessible, and the shifts in the meta are definitely creating fluctuations in certain card prices. So there's still just a very active and very healthy secondary market, and that is a really important factor in having a good, successful card game, is how good and well-performing is your secondary market, and Digimon's definitely looks to be in a really good spot. Even though in Bandai's eyes and most game development eyes, that's not necessarily the primary focus, it's just good to acknowledge the fact that we are finally in a healthier position, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how the game will continue to grow and evolve. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are different ways that you could support me in the channel. So one of those ways is I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so whenever you use that affiliate link to buy cards off of tcgplayer.com, then some of the money will go to supporting me in the channel, and on top of which I also do stream over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so following and subbing is a good way to support me over on that platform as well. And on top of that, I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so whenever you buy one of my designs through them, then some of that money will also help go to supporting me in the channel. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.